Welcome into the Commander's Report. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Thank you guys so much for joining me here on a Saturday. Got some Commanders coaching rumors for you guys today. A new slate of coaching rumors from around the league's top insiders dropped today, and there was a big one from the Athletic's Diana Russini breaking down the Commanders situation after a very disappointing 2025 season. Now, before we get into it today, make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already, because we're just getting started with our 2026 offseason coverage here on the Commanders Report. We're going to have everything for you guys, from coaching searches, because we're for sure, or at least it sounds like we're for sure going to be looking for a new defensive coordinator, could be looking for a new offensive coordinator as well as some position coaches, and then that's not even including free agency, trades, the draft, all that stuff. We're going to have you guys covered with the latest news and rumors surrounding the Washington Commanders, as well as breaking news coverage every time Adam Peters makes a big move for the Burgundy and Gold this offseason. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already to never miss any of our free content here on the Commanders Report. All right, so let's dive into this quote from the Athletic's Diana Russini today, breaking down the Washington Commanders' situation after a very disappointing 2025 campaign for the Washington Commanders. Pretty self-evident that this team did not meet expectations this year after exceeding expectations in 2024. This is what Russini has to say about the situation in Washington as we approach Black Monday in a couple days from now. She says, quote, Commanders coach Dan Quinn is expected back for the 2026 season, though changes to the offense and the defense remain possible after Washington has slumped to a 4-12 record. Quinn took over defensive play calling from Joe Whitt Jr. in early November, and Washington has also had conversations about potentially moving on from Kliff Kingsbury, even if he doesn't get a head coaching job. Some in the building say there's been a disconnect between Kingsbury and general manager Adam Peters. When was the last time we were watching to see if an offensive coordinator was going to get fired while also preparing for head coaching interviews? We'll see how this shakes out. So that's definitely an interesting situation here that Kliff Kingsbury is drawing some interest from other teams around the league. The three ones, I should say, that are the most heavily linked to Kliff at this point are the Tennessee Titans, Las Vegas Raiders, and New York Giants, depending on which insider you listen to. So, Kliff is somebody that's getting head coaching interest, but apparently the Commanders are having discussions about potentially letting go of Kliff Kingsbury as their offensive coordinator, even if he doesn't get a head coaching job, which would be definitely interesting, because it sounds like from this report that the Commanders are certainly going to be looking to hire a new defensive coordinator. And after, Dan Quinn demoted Joe Whitt Jr. early in the season, that the writing was kind of on the wall there. We kind of already knew that the Commanders would be looking for a new defensive coordinator, but the Kingsbury one would be a little bit of a surprise to me, because there has been so many, injuries to the offensive side of the ball to key players like Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. And I actually think at points this season, Kingsbury's actually done a pretty decent job keeping the offense afloat when he really didn't have much to work with from an offensive talent perspective. So listen, man, I think, just starting with the top here, in terms of my takes on this entire situation, we'll start with Dan Quinn, because I think keeping him is the right decision, at least for one more year. I think next year there should be a little bit of heat on his tush, all right? Because if he doesn't, perform next year, and it's the second straight year where the team's not performing well and they're not responding to his leadership, then yeah, I think you think about maybe making the switch at head coach, especially if he gets another round of offensive coordinator hires and they're still not, performing up to snuff. I think then you can possibly look at replacing the head coach. But just a year removed from an NFC Championship game appearance, and if you've been watching Hard Knocks during this season of Hard Knocks in the NFC East division, it's pretty clear the locker room is still responding to Dan Quinn. I still think Coach Quinn is an excellent culture builder. I think that he's somebody that players want to play for, and I think that his style of leadership can absolutely work here in Washington and lead this team potentially to some Super Bowl championships down the road. So I think that Quinn is still the correct guy to lead this team into the future. And even though this year has been greatly disappointing, I still have a level of faith in him to be able to pick the right coordinators, pick the right players, or pick the right coaches to fill out this coaching staff, build this roster, hopefully learn from a couple of his mistakes this offseason in terms of roster building and that sort of stuff, which of course some of the blame goes towards GM Adam Peters as well. But, I do think keeping Dan Quinn for at least one more season is the right decision here in Washington. In terms of the coordinators, we'll start with the defensive coordinator, Joe Whitt Jr., because I absolutely think that's necessary. You got to get somebody else in there, and we'll see if Dan Quinn decides to keep defensive play calling duties. I know that was one of the things that he didn't want to do when he originally took the job here in Washington, is he felt like when he was calling defensive plays in Atlanta that he was being spread a little bit too thin. He wanted to be able to just focus on the sideline and the game itself and not have to worry about calling the defensive plays. He wanted somebody to be able to do that adequately, and unfortunately Joe Whitt Jr. wasn't up to snuff in that regard this year. Now, in terms of guys that they could go get, maybe there's some people that formerly worked for Mike McCarthy in Dallas that he could potentially bring in. We'll probably put together a video probably next week of the top defensive coordinator candidates for the Washington Commanders. But I would say it's probably somebody that's been connected to Dan Quinn in the past is probably the people that he would look at the most. But in terms of Kliff Kingsbury, guys, if I'm being completely honest with you, if he's not going to take a head coaching job elsewhere, I think he's another guy that I would want to keep for one more season. Now, obviously, he'd be going into next season, with a little bit of a hot seat because, frankly, the offense didn't perform the way it was supposed to perform this year. And, some of that is on Kliff, absolutely. But I also think part of that is not on Kliff. We know that, any offensive play caller, if you lose, a star quarterback for most of the season and your star wide receiver for a good chunk of the season, it's not going to be too great. If you're dealing with backups in there all the time, especially at key positions, I actually think the offense has maybe even overperformed what you would expect from this team given the injuries that they've had. So I look at Kingsbury as somebody that, does some very creative stuff in the motion game and in the screen game. And, I don't know if I want to lose that. And plus, I think his style of offense, that kind of air raid, shotgun heavy offense that we've seen from him, is a beautiful fit for Jaden Daniels and his skill set. And if we, get rid of him for somebody that runs a more quote-unquote pro-style offense, it might be another year of transition and development for Jaden Daniels when this is a team that's trying to make the most of JD while he's on his rookie contract. So I think Kingsbury, still a very bright offensive mind. I think he works really well with Jaden Daniels and his skill set. And I think if you can get him, the proper talent on this roster and you can keep these guys healthy for a season, we're going to see this offense get back to where it was in 2024, where it was one of the best offenses in the National Football League. There's a reason why all these teams, at least the Titans, Giants, and Raiders, have been connected to Kingsbury as a potential head coach heading into 2026. It's because people around the league respect Kingsbury and his offensive play calling prowess. Now, another part of this report from Rossini is that apparently Kingsbury's been having a little bit of a disconnect with general manager Adam Peters. And, what this means to me is that maybe Peters wants to run a little bit more of a traditional under center, Kyle Shanahan, style of offense where, most of the best teams in the National Football League and most of the best offenses do run most of their plays out of under center. And the Commanders are one of these teams offensively that doesn't run a lot of under center stuff. They run a lot of it out of pistol and out of the shotgun, which, is not necessarily the modern NFL. The modern NFL is actually leaning more towards, the under center game and the play action game and misdirection and all these different things. And, the Commanders aren't really a team that dives into that all that much. Now, I think Kliff's style of offense makes it easier on younger quarterbacks to transition into the league because it can be a big leap for these college quarterbacks and these younger quarterbacks to go from a heavy shotgun, heavy pistol, spread style offense in college, which is what most teams in college run nowadays, and then transition to an under center game in like a Shanahan or just a traditional pro style offense. And I think that's part of the reason why Kingsbury has had the success that he's had transitioning some of these younger quarterbacks into really effective players early on in their respective careers. I mean, Kyler Murray was a legitimate MVP candidate by his second year under Kingsbury's offense in Arizona. I mean, Jaden Daniels had one of the best, if not the best, rookie season in NFL history playing in this offense in 2024. Now, I think because, the run game can't be necessarily as multiple in a shotgun and pistol heavy offense as it is under center. The play action game can't be nearly as extensive as in an under center style offense. You can make an argument that this offense can be quote unquote figured out a little bit easier than other offenses, but I would also argue that having a guy like Jaden Daniels who can run the ball as well as he can, and having the read option at your disposal when you're in shotgun, I think that this is a perfect fit for a rushing quarterback like Jaden Daniels is. Not to mention he's been in this system for 2 years and he's got some continuity and a good knowledge base. Whereas, if they end up firing Kingsbury, my guess is with Adam Peters' connections, with Dan Quinn's connections to Kyle Shanahan, my guess is that they're going to hire somebody from the Shanahan tree. And, in theory, the Shanahan tree might be the most, fruitful offensive coaching tree in the National Football League, in football right now. And there's certainly a lot of people within that realm that could be decent candidates in their own right, and they're good offensive minds. But my biggest question mark from moving on to Kingsbury and going to more of a under center, play action, pure progression style offense there is how does Jaden Daniels adjust to that in just one offseason? Because, he's never played in a system like that, even in the pros. And, he certainly had to get used to some elements of the pro game, transitioning from LSU to the Commanders. But, I think Kingsbury's offense, this heavy spread, heavy shotgun and pistol, not only takes advantage of his legs and his rushing ability very well, but also it helps that transition from the college game and into the NFL game. And I think it's helped Jaden maximize his ability as a passer early on in his career. So it'd be definitely an interesting adventure to see this team go to a Shanahan-style offense next year under a Shanahan-style offensive coordinator. Obviously, Dan Quinn had a lot of success with Shanahan himself being his offensive coordinator. He got Matt Ryan to an MVP trophy and all that different stuff. So it would not shock me if the Commanders fire Kingsbury and bring in somebody from the Shanahan tree here to be the new offensive coordinator. But I would have my worries and my doubts about that. I really would, because I do think that Kingsbury and Daniels fit each other's styles so beautifully. And I think that's why I was such a big fan of bringing in Kingsbury and then drafting Daniels to pair with him initially. And we saw how beautifully that worked in year one. And listen, man, Jaden just wasn't on the field healthy for a lot of this season. And even when he was, Terry McLaurin wasn't on the field much fully healthy this season. So, I want to see what another year of Kingsbury and Jaden Daniels looks like. But at this point, especially if there's a rift between Kingsbury and Peters, and especially if there's a rift between Kingsbury and Quinn, I could certainly see Kingsbury get fired. Probably in the next 48 hours or so, whenever, the decision would come down. But, while I'm at it here and we're talking about potential coaching changes, somebody at a position coach level that I would like to see replaced this year is offensive line coach Bobby Johnson, who was tasked with developing Josh Connerly Jr. this year. And frankly, Connerly does not look good at all. And Connerly was supposed to be one of the more pro-ready tackles in the entire class, and he comes in here and he does not look good at all. And, this has been an offensive line that's gotten a ton of false starts throughout the season, and it's just an undisciplined group. And I think Bobby Johnson, over the last several years has proven he's not a very good offensive line coach. Not a lot of, young players that have had a lot of success under his tutelage. A lot of the guys that have come in here and have had success are the guys that they've brought in free agency via trade, like Laramie Tunsil and Tyler Biadasz and et cetera. So I would like to see them move on for sure from Joe Whitt Jr. and Bobby Johnson. And I guess we'll just have to see on Kliff Kingsbury. Personally, I would give him one more season to see what he can do with Jaden Daniels before moving on. If it's another disappointing season next year, I would certainly think about moving on from Kingsbury. But as long as he's not getting poached for a head coaching position, I would personally stick with Kliff Kingsbury as OC for one more year. But as I mentioned, if there's a rift growing between Kingsbury and, the Commanders front office, there could be a split at some point here over the next 48 hours. So we'll keep you guys updated on all the latest Commanders coaching updates. Black Monday update coming up in a couple days here. Of course, we'll let you guys know what happens in the season finale tomorrow versus the Philadelphia Eagles. But either way, the Commanders are going to have a top 7 draft pick, and they're going to cement what has been one of the most disappointing seasons in Commanders history tomorrow afternoon. So hopefully in 2026 they can get this ship turned around so we can get ourselves in a position where we're competing for Super Bowls again, like we were in 2024. So that'll be it for today's show, guys. Greatly appreciate you stopping by here today. If you guys want more Commanders content all throughout the 2026 offseason, make sure you guys click that subscribe button. Until next time, guys, hail to the Commanders.